Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're viewing us from today. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I'd like to kindly note that all attendees will remain muted throughout the duration of today's webinar. Should you have any questions for our presenter regarding today's topic, we encourage you to use the designated tab question in your GoToMedia control panel. Also, slides and recording of this webinar will be available on our website after the presentation. Excuse me. And without much further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speaker today. Tammie Van Buren comes to us with more than 25 years of experience in quality control and over 8 years of food experience as an SQF practitioner responsible for implementing, monitoring, and maintaining SQF systems at various certified sites such as Treehouse Foods and DNW Fine Pack. Tammie is currently the SQF Compliance Manager, overseeing the management and evolution of SQFI's Compliance Integrity Program using data and statistics. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tammie. Thank you very much.
All right, Chris, thank you very much for the great introduction. Perry Johnson has a place in my heart. When I got into the food industry at DNW Fine Pack, Perry Johnson was our registrar, so it takes me back to be able to join you all for a webinar today. So I really appreciate it. When we were talking about what should we do for this year's webinar, because we typically do participate in one Perry Johnson webinar every year, you know, one of the things that we talked about, that we've been talking about here at SQF lately, based on some of the validation audits that we've been doing. For those of you in the audience that doesn't necessarily know what a validation audit is, it's where SQF goes out to certified sites and we audit the audit process to make sure that what is written by the auditor in the audit report is reflective of actual conditions at the site. So we've been out the last 6 months going to a variety of sites. We've been in 10 so far. We have a couple more scheduled coming up. So we're getting some valuable information. But one of the things that we've recognized is that our food safety plans could use a little bit of work. You know, a lot of times somebody 20 years ago wrote a food safety plan, and then it just gets handed off to the new SQF practitioner or the new food safety manager, you know, every few years. And we don't actually do a real good, honest evaluation of what's there. So, so we've been seeing, you know, our food safety plans need some work. So I threw out the idea to Chris and said, how about let's just go back to the basics. Let's just start with that food safety plan. And so that's where we are today. So,
and you know, coming off of a very successful SQF event recently at the conference, you know, I of course heard about the new changes, you know, a lot of new things kind of coming down the pipe. And when we were having conversations in small groups and, you know, just with some SQF practitioners, you know, one of the things they kind of talked about was getting back to the basics. And, you know, we've kind of gotten past COVID and the response to COVID and all of the changes that, you know, our industry saw. And, you know, really kind of we're at that point now where everyone wants to kind of get back to doing, you know, just good food safety. And that really starts, you know, fundamentally with, you know, your food safety plan. So I think it's a great topic. You know, thank you so much for your time today, and really looking forward to it.
I think we have a couple of housekeeping items. Chris, if you want to cover those, and then we'll jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. So we covered this really quickly at the beginning, but one of the things that we get a lot is, you know, how can I get my hands on the slides, or how can I see the presentation? So all the slides and recording will be available on our website, PJRFSI.com, at the conclusion of today's event. Usually gives us, you know, a few hours to get it posted. It'll also be on our social medias, YouTube and Facebook channels as well. If you have any additional questions for either PJRFSI or our presenter, Tammie with SQFI, you know, please reach out to us directly, and there'll be a slide at the end with some additional contact information for Tammie.
Okay. Yeah, so as we were talking about, food safety plan. Oh, it's the basic. it's the building block, it's the foundation, and I just threw, 3 programs up there, but those all build from the food safety plan. And so as I've been out talking to people at our sites and doing those validation audits, one of the things that we look at is the environmental monitoring plan. And so we're seeing a little bit of disconnect there. And so we've really been emphasizing with our auditors, with our sites, that, everything's connected, and if you start with the food safety plan as the foundation for your food safety program, and then you build out from there, then everything will be connected together. And so that really is the focus of what we want sites to get from their food safety plan is that foundation for writing the rest of their programs. Your food safety plan, you identify those biological hazards. So from there, you identify, well, what do I need to be monitoring for as far as pathogens go? And that's where you create that environmental monitoring program. Same thing with allergen program. You identify those chemical hazards. And, I worked in a bakery, and we had one production line that about 50% of the time did cheese crackers. So I wasn't worried about shellfish in the middle of my plant. I was worried about milk and how it had the potential to cross-contaminate other production lines. So I needed to make sure my allergen program was written based off me identifying milk as that significant hazard for some of my non-milk crackers. And so we built our allergen program around that. Same thing with foreign material program. Think those physical hazards that you identify in your food safety plan. I was recently in a facility, and they had a metal detector, as do most facilities, but I'm looking around going, I don't really see metal as a significant hazard. They did have some stainless items, but they didn't have a lot of moving parts where when you think metal shavings and things like that, they just didn't have that. And I thought, why do they have a metal detector if they don't really have metal in their facility as a hazard? But they had wood everywhere. There were pallets it was an old facility, so some of the older things within the facility were made out of wood. And so I thought, that's the hazard I see that they really had not addressed in their foreign material program. So again, making sure that food safety plan, foundation, and then we build out from there and we connect all the dots. So to me, just so important.
Well, and just real quickly on that, as far as, keeping up your food safety plan, what are some of the times, that you should absolutely sit down and make changes? As an SQF practitioner, should this be something that you do quarterly, maybe yearly? Obviously, if you've got changes to your facility, if you're adding new lines, I understand you would want to do it at that point, but could you maybe suggest a few other times as best practices?
Yeah, honestly, anytime anything changes that would impact your food safety program, you should review that food safety plan. And later in the presentation, I've got some times where non-conformances are written because people didn't do just that. But I think the one big time that people are missing is, I mentioned at the start of this, when somebody new starts. So you get a new practitioner, you get a new, food safety manager, and that person should be automatically just reviewing the program to determine if there were any changes that were missed. And I think that's one opportunity that we miss out on a lot of time is when new people come in. But we're going to talk later on in the presentation. I've got some slides about changes and about what kinds of changes you want to include, when to review that food safety plan for those changes. So hold that thought. We're going to talk about it some more. So as far as top non-conformances overall for food safety plans, number one, far and away, like 5 times as many non-conformances are written for flow diagram as it is anything else in your food safety plan. A lot of those center around those changes, Chris. So we get a new piece of equipment, we get a new production line, we get a new employee. You know, we forget to go back and change our flow diagram, or we're missing certain certain waste stream, like a waste stream. That's a common one. We forgot to put waste, and that's required on your flow diagram. Some of your inputs are missing, some of your ingredients, but also a lot of times things like water, gas, ice, things like that we don't necessarily think of as being an ingredient, but it's, an input to the process, and it needs to be there. So that's probably the most common miss on the flow diagram. Number 2 would be those food safety hazards. Not doing that hazard analysis correctly, not doing it in depth. I saw some non-conformances when I was reviewing for this presentation that said they didn't even mention biological, chemical, physical. So then that makes me want to say, can I see your HACCP certificate to see who trained you to write food safety plans if you don't mention those things in there? So those are that's number 2 on the list. Number 3 is that hazard significance. So you identify the hazards, and then you have to have some type of methodology for how you determine what hazards are significant enough that you need controls in place. And so most people think about that matrix that has yellow, red, green. Most people have it color coded. There are lots of different ones. We don't have a specific one that has to be used. I tell people all the time I use Google a lot. If you Google, hazard analysis, methodology, you will get that red, yellow, green chart that tells you I need to have some kind of control in place because that hazard is significant. And we don't see that methodology defined all the time. So that makes number 3 on our top non-conformances for food safety plan. So we're not going to dive into these 3 today because, quite honestly, Chris, we could do a webinar on every single one of them, and there's no way we could just, throw it all into one 45-minute webinar because we just couldn't do each one of them justice. So,
well, I will ask one important question around this. I know you and I have had conversations before about training, and just training specifically. It seems like there's really not enough of it in our industry anymore. I know that SQFI is a great resource, online. You guys have a ton of training materials and things like that. So if I have a customer that is having some problems with just understanding the concepts of the flow diagram, and, I think you and I both know that a lot of these that you're probably seeing out in the marketplace are just being downloaded from things like Google, right? And then just people trying to plug in what makes sense with their facilities. So when it comes to just some training around, the CCPs and things like that, with these specific non-conformances, does SQF currently, or are you going to in the future, have some training specifically around, these types of issues or non-conformances that y'all are seeing?
Yeah, one of the things that SQF always prides itself on are the free resources that we have available. So, going on our website, we do have a training page. It can link you to all of our training centers, as well as the training that SQF offers. So check that out. But also our guidance documents and our tip sheets, those are on our website. And if there's something that's not there that you think, hey, Tammie, I need a guidance document on that flow diagram, because we would do a guidance document on food safety plan, but we may not break it down into the components. So if you say, you know what, Tammie, I think we just need one guidance document that talks nothing about flow diagrams, I would absolutely be on board with writing, a new guidance document. We post them all the time. There will be more coming out. You mentioned edition 10. There will be a ton more that will get added to the website for edition 10 as that comes out and those resources are posted. We also have on our website, you can find free webinars that we've done. We also have a YouTube channel, just as Perry Johnson does, where you can find webinars and presentations from previous SQF Unites conferences. You can find lots of webinars that we've done that really on any topic that you want, and those go back for years, because some of those are great. I mean, they might be a few years old, but they've got some good information that's still relevant today.
Yeah, you know, I think I'm coming up on my 11th or 12th year in the industry, and you know, there are videos that I will still go back and watch that sometimes are 3 and 4 years old, just because the way the content is delivered is just really what I'm looking for as a refresher. So, you know, if you're not familiar with of course your website and all the resources and guidance documents, you know, please take some time to go out there and check it out. If you think that there's some, like Tammie mentioned, if there's some training that maybe your site needs that is not available on there, you know, reach out to one of the resources, you know, reach out to us at Perry Johnson, and we'd be happy to, you know, introduce you to someone that does the training. So just keep that in mind, because, you know, like Tammie mentioned, each one of these non-conformances, it could be broken down into its own webinar. So.
Absolutely. So yeah, absolutely. Just reach out. That's the point we want to make. Reach out and just ask. It never hurts to ask if there's something that you're not seeing that you need. But what we are going to do, we're going to dive into 3 topics today. These are the ones that don't necessarily make our top 3 non-conformance list for food safety plan, but we do see non-conformances from them. And again, it also is getting us back to the basics too. So very first step in Codex HACCP, identify that HACCP team or that food safety plan team. And so the SQF code requires that the SQF practitioner be on the food safety plan team. It also requires that you have multidisciplinary participants. So what does that mean? Technical, production people, engineering, some of the others. I don't know about you, Chris, but I would never have a food safety team that didn't have maintenance on there. You know, how do you understand, you know, physical hazards and the movements and, you know, workings of machines and what could possibly contaminate and create a hazard if you don't have somebody that's an expert on machinery and equipment? So, you know, maintenance is always a great person. I don't know about you, Chris. Anybody else that you would include?
Well, you know, I think it's also important to remember if you've got more than one shift, you know, you want representation, of course, from multiple shifts, multiple people at multiple shifts. Either the best perspective you can get, you know, of course, is going to give you all the information. So, you know, definitely reach out to more people than you think you're going to need.
Absolutely. That's a great point, because we all know things happen differently on off shifts, right? So getting that perspective, I think just could only enhance your food safety team. So definitely, you know, check it out. You know, sometimes, you know, and I do a lot of training on teams in general, but sometimes you want somebody that's a fresh set of eyes, somebody that's not an expert. You know, reach out to your human resource people, reach out to your finance people to get them on the team, because they're the people that look at a process and go, what if that happened? Or, you know, could that happen? Or what about that? So they bring that fresh perspective. So I would say there's not anybody I would say couldn't be on the team. You know, you're dealing with ingredients, get your procurement or your purchasing people, you know, to be on the team, because they can talk to ingredients and, you know, how they purchase and buy things. And so, you know,
Well, and then when you start to talk about, you know, the food safety culture and, you know, the environment of the entire workplace, then, you know, you've got buy-in from multiple folks in different departments, and it really just kind of reinforces all of those things that you're doing. So, you know, I think the food safety team is very important. Don't think that you all necessarily have a part to play in the audit. You know, I mean, you can, of course, if you've got 20 people on your team, you know, you're not all going to be the main contact in the audit. So, you know, understand that that still is a little different of a process versus your team on site and your practitioner. But, you know, we can talk about that more in depth, of course. But
Absolutely. But there's a reason why this is step number one. You put together that strong team, and then that's, again, that basic building block for putting your food safety plan together, which ultimately then your whole program relies on. So, but we do see common non-conformances for food safety team. A few of them I wanted to list here. SQF, the code does require your practitioner be on the team. So we do see a few sites that do not have their practitioner on the team. I'm not even going to begin to speculate why they wouldn't be. You know, they're responsible for your food safety program and we don't put them on the team. I'm not really sure how that works, but we do see some non-conformances for that. We do see teams that are not multidisciplinary, and it only includes the food safety department. And, you know, one thing that we want to stress, that we try to stress, you know, through the code and having, you know, the code start with management commitment, is that we're all in this together. And managers, plant managers, senior management team, they're all a part of this. And so they have some ownership there. And so too many times though, we see sites where the food safety team is just members of the food safety or quality department, and that does not meet code requirements. And then the last one, we talked about changes. So probably the biggest non-conformance as it relates to the team requirement is somebody left and we didn't take their name off. A new practitioner got identified and we didn't add them to the team. So, or at least update the documentation. So making sure that the records get updated when changes occur, particularly in personnel changes, is one of the biggest misses when it comes to 2.4.3.2. So make sure you keep everything up to date. You mentioned training at the beginning, Chris. So let's dive into training. So within 2.4.3, we don't mention training because it's mentioned in the training program, 2.9.2. And we say there, it's required for all staff involved in the developing and maintaining of food safety plans. Training's required. And so just kind of makes sense, right? Now, I don't know about you, Chris, but we were just talking about this the other day at SQF. HACCP training for the HACCP team, what does it usually consist of? A 30-minute, basically in 30 minutes, you can't tell them anything more than what HACCP stands for. So yeah. I'm not sure why we think that meets, you know, the requirements of training your HACCP team, a 30-minute rundown on, you know, the basics, or, you know, if we're all wild and crazy, we go a full hour. But at the same time, the SQF code requires the SQF practitioner to have a HACCP course taken externally. So the internal HACCP team, we don't define where they need to get that HACCP training. So a lot of times it is the practitioner. That's acceptable. That meets code requirements. But put some thought into it. You know, if you know, most HACCP classes you're spending on average 2 days, why would you think a 30-minute or a 1-hour HACCP training would be sufficient for your HACCP team? I'm not sure where, you know, sites come from on that. But definitely put some time into training.
Well, I sometimes I think it's important to talk about, risks, right? Mitigating the risks and the whole reason why we do what we do. So worst case scenario is a recall. How recalls go, it really depends on where they find fault. And when things really start getting peeled back and looked at under a microscope, you as a quality assurance manager and your executive team is going to have to explain to someone why a 30-minute class was sufficient, from your point of view. And that's going to be a very uncomfortable spot for you to be in. So I would really just hate for anyone to, not really think these things through and really kind of punt, training to another day, because it's of the utmost importance that your staff gets this done and you check it off, and just yearly you can go back and update it, however you decide to do that. But, please, please, please don't let a recall be the first time that you look in the mirror and say, hey, maybe our training program is not up to what it should be.
Exactly. No, that's a great point. So let's talk about some of those common non-conformances that we do see. Because yeah, like you said, you don't want a recall to be the first time that somebody questions you about your training program. So some of our common non-conformances as it relates to HACCP training, some sites just aren't training their HACCP team members. And it is a requirement. 2.9.2.1 says that basically the HACCP team, those people that are writing, developing, implementing, maintaining that HACCP plan has to have training. But we see sites that don't have documented training for their HACCP team members. We see sites that their SQF practitioner or their backup did not have that evidence of HACCP training. And that's that external training. We no longer say 2 days, but what we say is it has to be extensively used in a country. It has to be by a recognized institution. So, I see so many on LinkedIn, going through the internet. I see everybody's offering HACCP training. SQF doesn't offer HACCP training. We're not a recognized institution for HACCP training, so we're not out there offering, hey, come get a 2-day HACCP class with us. But it has to be a recognized institution. So, if you see Tammie's Training Center is offering a HACCP class, am I really a recognized institution? So keep that in mind when you're looking for training for your practitioner, for your backup. And it has to have an assessment at the end of it. So, making sure that they're tested or assessed on the knowledge that they learned during that HACCP training. So very important. So if that's the requirement for the practitioner, why wouldn't you kind of model your internal training for your HACCP team along those same lines? But again, we're seeing sites where the practitioner or the backup didn't have that training in place. And then we see probably more non-conformances for training, for HACCP training, that the refresher or the annual HACCP training was not completed. So let me just throw out there, that's not an SQF requirement. Nowhere in the SQF code does it say you have to have annual HACCP training. What it says is that basically your HACCP team or those people responsible for your food safety plans have to be trained. So that third bullet point there comes from sites that are writing into their training program that they're gonna do refresher or annual HACCP training. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but those non-conformances are being written against their own programs and not written against the code. Thoughts, Chris, on training?
Yeah, no, so I just to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So the customer gets a non-conformance for not having a training or, not doing it or meeting the code requirements. And then in their non-conformance closure, they're writing in that they're going to do an annual HACCP refresher as their kind of remediation. And that's what's getting kicked back, saying that that's not That's not the code?
No, actually, they're getting a non-conformance to their training program. So the code says you have to train your HACCP team, and
Mhm.
I'm summarizing, has to train your HACCP team. And then in the code, it says you have to identify what refresher training you're going to do. And sites are identifying HACCP as a needed refresher training. So it's in their internal procedure that they're going to do annual HACCP training for their team, and then they just don't do it.
Right.
So they're getting that non-conformance, not against the code, but against their own written program because they didn't follow their program.
Yeah, this one is always such an interesting one because, certification bodies like ours for a long time were really in the training business. We had training departments and we did a lot of it. And then as the industry sort of has changed with the allocation of trainers also being auditors, it makes it a lot more difficult. So, we as a company, we don't do training. If you come to us with training, I can introduce you to different consultants or different training companies, but it does sort of put us in this very unique situation where I hear a lot, from the customers because they will come to us specifically with training requests or questions. And, one of the things that I, as a first line of defense, always tell people to check in on is their local university, the co-op extension office, something like that, because, the training costs a lot of times can be just as expensive as your certification costs. And, understand the reasoning for that, right? Most of the time, these consultants are also trainers, are also auditors. And so their time valuation is really the same, their day to day, regardless of which job they're performing, is at the same rate. So there's really not a huge difference in price. So that's why I'm a big fan of, the local university extension offices, because a lot of times it's going to be local to your business, which is really important because while I do think that training on site, virtually is a good option, it's great. We all know, I'm sure a lot of us today while we're doing this webinar have been interrupted by people on our own team, right? Coming in with questions. If you're the SQF practitioner, you've got a lot of things that you're doing at the same time. So I'm a big fan of getting off-site for training. I think it's really important to just focus on that and, get out for a day. So check with your local university first. After that, of course, there's all kinds of additional resources that we can, help you out with. But always say check there first, because I think a lot of times training is it's kind of a scary undertaking, right? We think about sending our 10-person team out for a week to Orlando, and who can do that? So resources are always really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And then don't forget, SQF, we have almost 40 training centers. You can access them on our website. While SQF doesn't have a HACCP course that we sponsor through our training centers, many of our training centers are recognized institutions that can deliver HACCP training. And so through our website, you can get to their website, you can see their full offering of training. So yeah, I encourage you, whether you're calling Gary Johnson or SQF.
Yeah, and obviously, like number 3, it doesn't have to be HACCP every year. You can do all sorts of different courses, things to keep your team engaged around that. So, while HACCP is really important, that can't be your only focus.
Right, exactly. No, yeah, because the code's very non-specific. It says the site shall develop their refresher training needs. And so it's really up to the site to determine how often to train people and give refresher training. So yeah, so absolutely read the code, understand what those requirements say so that you can meet that. And then the third topic we're talking about today is that review. So you've got your team, you've done all the other things, your flow diagrams, your hazard analysis, you've identified your CCPs, you've figured out how to monitor and check and verify and validate, and you've done all of that. So the last thing that we look at is your HACCP or your food safety plan review, 24314. The SQF code specifically says it has to be done annually at a minimum annually. As you pointed out, Chris, the very beginning, changes happen all the time. And so what kind of changes would we expect that sites would be looking at their HACCP plan? Process changes, you know, that may or may not impact their flow diagram, but it certainly would impact their hazard analysis if you've changed a process, updated it, or you know, moved something around, order of the way you do things even. That's a process change. How does it implement or impact your food safety plan? Same thing with equipment. Maybe we upgrade equipment, maybe we get new equipment. Sometimes we remove pieces of equipment. So now how does that impact it? You know, inputs, we change suppliers, we change ingredients, we get updated ingredients that our suppliers have changed. So all kinds of things around the inputs going in. So we need to make sure that when something changes, that we do address that within a plan review. And then really the code just sums it up and says any other changes that could affect product safety. And you're expected to review your plan. And so too many times, plan reviews, I know how they go. I've worked in SQF certified sites. We got the HACCP team together and we say, here, sign this, saying that we reviewed the plan, you know, because we've not had any changes this past year, you know, and so we don't actually go and do or go and see. You know, a HACCP plan review, if it takes you 5 minutes to review your HACCP plan, you probably didn't do it right. If it takes you 30 minutes to review your HACCP plan annually, still probably didn't do it right. You should be taking that flow diagram. You should be walking the floor, the production area, start to finish, looking at every single box on that flow diagram, and then trying to find those boxes that are missing off of that flow diagram. That's a part of your annual review. You should be doing that. You should be looking at that hazard analysis to make sure that everything's identified, because you certainly could have forgotten something. Even looking at the team members to make sure everybody's names on there correctly, making sure the right people are still there, make sure you haven't removed anybody, added anybody. Yeah, there's just so much to do. So again, if you're not putting the time into the review, you're not doing it right. Okay, so whole plan, the entire plan has to be reviewed. Step 1 through step 12, everything has to be reviewed. So make sure you're doing that. And so I just want to, again, common non-conformances as it relates to the plan review. Annual review, past due. You know, the code says at a minimum, it's annual. And so we're seeing plans that haven't been reviewed for 18 months, for 2 years. So making sure you get that annual review. I don't know if you have any tips or techniques for how to remember those reviews, Chris, but gosh, with our electronics nowadays, if you don't have a reminder set up somewhere, you know, certainly you could do that. You know, I always liked my verification matrix, verification and validation matrix. You know, it had all my annual things on it. So I could just check it off, you know, to make sure I got it done. So whatever you need to do to make sure you get that annual review, make sure you do it. And if you're really doing it like you're supposed to, when changes occur, almost everybody is going to be reviewing their plan more than once a year. So annual is a minimum, but we see that. We see, you know, lots of sites that will go months beyond that annual review before they actually review their plan. Key takeaways from today. Identify the right food safety plan team. Again, that's step 1 of Codex. So get that team correctly identified, the right people. It's got to be more than just the practitioners. It's got to be more than just, you know, the food safety or quality team. It's got to be the right people with the right expertise. You know, one thing that we didn't mention earlier, but a micro person, you know, you got to identify those pathogens. I'm not a micro person at all. So everything I've learned about microbiology and pathogens, you know, has been based off of experience. So, you know, when I got into food, I had no idea that there were these pathogens that I had to worry about, that when they came in and the way I processed my food, they could grow spores. And then suddenly I got to worry about how it's manifesting at that process. Chris, you're on mute for some reason. I'm not hearing you. I don't know if anybody else is having problems, but I'm not hearing you.
Yeah, I think we had lost you for just a second when you were talking about pathogens, but you're back.
Okay, because you're back too. So obviously it was me with the problem. I was like, I can't hear Chris. I can see him talking. So yeah, so pathogens. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I got into bakery and I found out quickly that there are pathogens that grow spores, and in my process, that's how it manifests itself, is we're at a temperature where we could potentially grow spores, and now I got to worry about that, the spores. And so if you're not a micro person, if you're not, you know, on a one first name basis with pathogens, you should have an expert on your team who is. So again, reaching out, finding that right food safety plan team. Second key takeaway, evaluate the training program. You know, again, if it's a 30-minute, I mean, you can't do much more than say, here's what HACCP stands for in 30 minutes. So make sure it's meaningful. If you're gonna, you know, put your team through it, make sure it's meaningful. And then again, review your plan. Today, if you know, even if you reviewed it, you know, 6 months ago, I would just strongly encourage you, because again, you probably did the kind of flyby review, right? Nothing's changed, so we're just going to sign and say that we reviewed it. So make sure you do that good in-depth review. So those are my key takeaways. We're now at a point, we'll take any questions. I don't know if anybody has
perfect.
any. But...
So it's, you know, it's been a great presentation. You know, thanks so much for talking about back to basics today. I am looking here and it doesn't look like we have any questions from the audience. So we'll give it just a minute, and then, you know, if we don't have any, we'll just end a little bit early. So if you could, since we've got some folks on the line here today, I assume, you know, people are already thinking about the upcoming, you know, migration over to issue 10, or could you talk just a little bit? I know that that's not the subject of our meeting today, but maybe just some key dates that we should all keep in mind.
It is a great topic. So absolutely, I can fill everybody in. You know, we've put out timelines over the last year, and it's just kind of been best guess, but now we're kind of narrowing in on those dates. So within the next week, you should see most of the codes posted for public comment. So our technical working groups have been working very hard the last 6 months writing the new codes. So some of them are not the codes, but some of like Appendix 1, where it lists all the food sector categories, and there are changes proposed in Appendix 1. So if you're a honey manufacturer, or if you're around FSC 18 preserved foods, FSC 19 ingredients, you need to look at Appendix 1, because there's some changes. And so that one's already up for public comment. So definitely get in there, take a look at that. We have also posted Part A for public comment. It's been out there for a few weeks. We're going to keep it up for a few more weeks. But Part A, scoring. There's some changes that are proposed. Again, these are proposed changes. So until we get the public comment back, these are all just proposed changes. But there's a significant change in the way we are going to score and rate sites. So there's a significant change in the way we're going to audit sites. So I'm not gonna spill the surprise here, because I want you to go, and I want you to post positive and negative comments, both. So, let's say you love the scoring, then please post that you love the changes to scoring, because what we don't want is all the people that don't like it to post, and then nobody that likes it says anything, and then all we get are those comments that everybody's like, oh, I hate that, and then we're like, oh, maybe we need to do something different. So if you love it, like it, post, I like it, love it. I want to see that change. So again, both for and against. So get in there, make those comments. But we're about a week away from actually posting most of the codes, the full codes. So keep checking our website. There will be a spot. We've got a new commenting system this time, and it is super easy. For edition 9, it was done via an Excel spreadsheet that you had to download, and you had to put your comments in the Excel spreadsheet, and then you had to email the Excel spreadsheet. Those days are gone. You go on our website, and it's literally, you click, you get in there, and you just write your comments wherever. So it is super easy to do. So for sure, get in there and do that. But codes have to be posted for 30 days for public comment. And then from there, we'll take all those comments, we'll incorporate them into the code, and then we will publish. We are planning on publishing final code around August 1st, because we have to apply for benchmarking by September 5th, and our code has to be published with an implementation second quarter of 2026. Okay, so that's the plan. That's our timeline.
Great. Yeah, that's great news. Well, I really appreciate that. And, I'd really just kind of like to say that I completely agree on the public comment. Extremely important for both positives and negatives, because while I actually met some folks that were on some of the working groups recently at the trade show, and, you've got a large group of really diverse, individuals from our industry, but they can't represent every single sort of business or category or process. So, you might be doing something that's a little bit more unique or different than, something. So, please get on there and check that out, list any comments, and, be looking for those emails coming out from SQFI in the coming weeks.
Hey, Chris, I think we had a question show up.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is the best way to show objective evidence for internal HACCP training to show that it was robust training for the team? Would an internal assessment test be adequate?
Great questions. So there's lots of ways to demonstrate objective evidence. We train our auditors. They can get objective evidence through records, interviews, observations. So, showing them the training, I always like to print out anytime I train by PowerPoint, I always like to print out my PowerPoint slides with my notes in there, so that the auditor can look to see exactly what the training was about, what the content was. But having that, interview, auditors could talk to somebody that took the training, to see what they learned. That would be an absolute way to show objective evidence, through interviews. Now, I like the question that you've got here about an internal assessment. So tune in, the Food Manufacturing Code, edition 10. And some of the proposed language is that, and I'm just giving you a key sneak peek, that there would be an assessment, not necessarily a test. I'm not calling it a test, because a test and an assessment are two different things, right?
Yeah.
I think we can agree on that. So, but I think your internal training for your HACCP team absolutely should be assessed. So whether it's, that conversation with the trainees afterwards, or if it is a test, there's some type of assessment, assessing the outcome. So that's one way to determine it. So you look at that food safety plan that a person wrote, and you assess it to determine if it meets the requirements. So lots of different ways for objective evidence, but that was a great question.
And, you know, there's even ways to cross over, and, you know, I don't want to keep bringing in food safety culture, right? But I know that it still is a very common buzzword, something that a lot of folks are struggling with. So, you know, remember, assessment or test, it also doesn't have to be a negative thing, right? You can play games. This can be part of your food safety culture kind of, you know, process where you can have the employees compete with each other. You can win, you know, Starbucks gift card. I mean, there are all sorts of different ways that you can use, you know, the assessment of their knowledge without necessarily just being, you know, paper and pen.
No, that's a great point. I always love games. I love competition.
Same.
So whatever, you know, Chris and I were talking about the basketball tournament that, you know, might or might not be happening, you know, right now. So yeah, so competition can be a great way to, you know, present the content, a great way to assess, you know, the learnings from that. So, nope, great
Fantastic.
point.
Yeah, thanks for your question. Looks like that's all that we have for today. So with that, you know, Tammie, thank you so much again for showing up and presenting with us today. Thank you very much for all of your ongoing support with SQFI. And if there are any other questions, feel free to reach out to us at the conclusion. You know, Tammie's got her email address up on the screen now. We had ours at the beginning, and then, like I said, give us about an hour. We'll also have this published on our website and then send these out as well. So thanks very much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.